silence for the master.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you. On this auspicious day, we remember not only our First Lady Master Sylvia Tutt. 41 years ago, she was the First Lady to become a master of any livery company. And thanks to her legacy, we've been able to invite you all today to this beautiful livery hall. And my thanks to the Stationers' Company for having us here. I'm so pleased to see many of my fellow liverymen, freemen, and ladies and gentlemen to attend the London launch of the research project that our worshipful company sponsored with Leeds Beckett University on the importance of values for good governance. Sadly, some of the colleagues from the university are unwell at the moment, but I will hand over to our past master, David Locke, who's been instrumental in leading this project from inception to today's delivery. Past Master Locke.
Thank you very much indeed, Master, and may I add my welcome to you all. The Master is a master of understatement in the sense that some of our colleagues from Leeds, in fact it's all our colleagues from Leeds, very sadly our research director, Nick Beach, telephoned on Friday with COVID, and on Monday had the most sexy voice that I've heard from anybody in a long time, still in bed. The wonderful researcher, Maria Kulik, who has done some marvellous work on this project, she's sadly in hospital still. And the other member of the team, Simona, who was going to come down and help with this presentation, unfortunately, she's not well enough to travel. So it is therefore with enormous delight that I am pleased to introduce our two speakers who were involved in the project, but from the point of view of their companies. Christina Ingate, who was the former company secretary of London LGPS CIB Limited, and over on my left, Claire Bennett, company secretary of Quilter. We also have in the audience some members of the steering committee. I won't name them, but if you ask any difficult questions, I may invite them to come in and help. Now, given that we don't know anybody from these, they have asked me if I will present both the literature review and the findings from the interview. It will probably be slightly briefer than if they were doing it, but I will do my best. Unfortunately, it's not only our colleagues from Leeds who didn't make it. You may find that you're sitting on a seat with one of these, or you may find you're sitting on a seat with one of these. And there were in fact two boxes of these printed and couriered down from Leeds. One box has made it, one box hasn't. So if you are taking a return journey to Leeds this evening and you find a stray box of leaflets, would you please tell us what we can. If you want one of these and you haven't got one of these, but you've got one of these, there is a QR code on the back that will get you to one of these. Now, is there anything else that can go wrong? We hope not. What we're going to do this evening I'll say a little bit about the method we use, the literature review and the findings. But then I will ask my co-stars to share with you how it was for them and what their organisations got from it. And then we will, in a very informal way, have a discussion. We'll take your comments if you want us to expand on anything, and so on. So, as many of you will know, livery companies exist for a number of reasons. One of them is the development of their craft or profession. Another of them is education, both specifically for their craft and generally. And they all exist for the benefit of the public. And that's the basis from which this research started. If I quote from our charter, the objective to promote and support the development and advancement of the practice of administration to the highest professional standards in all areas of corporate governance for the benefit of the public. Now, we have done a lot. We have varied links with a growing number of universities. We have good links with schools, we have good links with the Institute, and we have done a number of things together. But there was a feeling in the company that actually governance was becoming more complex for a number of reasons that I will go into. That various codes, while they were positive, they weren't necessarily sufficient. And that the company was well placed to do some research. And we spent, I think, about 18 months scoping what it was that we would do. Because every time we thought we found something, somebody was doing it, and so on. And working with our partner, Leeds Beckett University, we lighted on the importance of values in research. And that has guided this research project. Now, I'm going to make a few quite succinct statements. And they were developed in a time when past master James Summers, Sharon Constance and I were preparing a lecture for the late Lord Mayor. And this was a series of very cogent statements about values, trust and brand. I'll just read them to you, they're very short. Integrity should be a key value for all organisations. Values, embraced and lived, create trust. Integrity and values must be embraced by everybody in the organisation and reflected in all the policies to inspire the right behaviours. Trust motivates existing and new clients to do business with the organisation and be its advocates, which enhances brand recognition. Brand is a promise that is kept. A trusted brand will stimulate more business and prosperity. So, values at the very centre of that. The purpose of the research was to find out to what extent organisations are embracing a way of life view of governance. To discover how organisations in different sectors determine and review their stated values, and to understand whether those values are relevant in a post-COVID world of hybrid working. Now, I mentioned earlier on that governance was becoming more difficult. And it's probably worth just giving 4 or 5 headlines as to why that is, and I'm sure you will recognise it. The first is environmental complexity. The pace and unpredictability of change nationally and internationally is accelerating. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are in virtually everything we have to deal with. But not only that, internal complexity as well. Organisational culture and values should affect executive and board behaviour in developing and delivering strategic plans, organisational changes and business growth. And later, when I come to the findings, you will hear that one of the bits of complexity was the different views and outlooks of Generation Y, Generation Z and Gen X people, which really weren't being considered sufficiently. Codes of conduct have impact, and compliance provides external validation, but it's not sufficient. And organisations should move from codes to proactivity, and their values should be their DNA. And we were privileged to work with the Financial Reporting Council at the start of this work, including Selina Bishop, who was due to be standing here a few years ago, and that was quite an inspiration to us. So, that's what we're planning to do. That's the complex environment in which we're doing. How did we decide to do it? Well, we did a literature review. We adopted an action research methodology, and we were extremely fortunate to find Maria, who was a former civil servant in the prison service, who just loved research and took early retirement and worked with us and with Leeds on this project. And much of the quality of what you see in the report is down to Maria. We asked, or we invited, organisations from different sectors to join the research. And the report refers to 13, but there have in fact now been 14 organisations, and 44 interviews have taken place within those organisations. We quite deliberately wanted organisations from different walks of life. So we have financial services, we have city council, we have a couple of education bodies from Housing Trust and Logistics Hub, because governance, of course, is important in all of those sectors. Now, this is a sort of academic gathering, and I know we have some distinguished academics with us, so I ought to start by defining terms, but I'm not going to read the whole page, and I have to hold it up here because the print is small. Values are normative beliefs about appropriate conduct and results. They often deeply embedded culture and help individuals to make sense of the world and influence and justify individuals' current or changing behaviours. They are entwined with culture, and that will come out again during the findings. And that subconsciously drives members of the organisations to make choices and decisions, and this is the phrase I'd like you to remember. They act as the glue that holds the team and the working environment together. And that was partly what was behind our decision to mention COVID and post-COVID. Because prior to COVID, everybody attended every day. Around the water cooler, the values got explained and people saw them being enacted. How was that happening? And people were sitting at home. That's the academic bit over. The team did a quite extensive literature research, and when you look at the publication, you will see that. I will just summarise the 10 key themes which came from that. Firstly, the identification of a values gap. There is a significant and often overlooked gap between the values held by UK businesses and those held by their employees. This misalignment can lead to disengagement, reduced morale, a lack of trust, and affecting organisational performance and employee retention. On good values and governance, good governance, corporate governance and values are inherently interconnected, with strong values underpinning ethical decision-making and transparency. Effective governance practices not only focus on accountability and regulatory compliance, also emphasise aligning organisational behaviour with core values to foster trust and integrity across all levels. Core values are the essential and enduring principles that guide organisational behaviour, decisions, and strategy. These fundamental tenets provide a stable foundation, ensuring consistency in the face of change and serving as a compass for both day-to-day actions and long-term strategic vision. Performance. Organisations with clear, well-defined values tend to achieve better performance outcomes. Values drive behaviour, enhance decision-making, and create a unified culture, all of which contribute to more efficient operations, higher levels of employee engagement, and ultimately greater organisational success. On the board contribution, boards of directors play a crucial role in creating and sustaining value by focusing on accountability and understanding the broader organisational context. By aligning corporate strategy with the organisation's core values, boards ensure their decision-making reflects both long-term objectives and ethical standards, driving sustainable growth and positive impact. Leader and subordinate values. It's essential for leaders to understand the values that they prioritise and align them with those of their subordinates. When leaders and employees share a common understanding of values, it fosters stronger relationships, higher levels inclusive work environment, driving better overall performance. On the impact of values. The impact of values within an organisation is felt at every level. Leaders set the tone by role modelling desired behaviours. Managers reinforce those values through consistent actions and communication, and employees empower one another by living out these values in their daily work. Together, this creates a powerful culture that drives organisational success. Impact on diversity. Factors such as gender, race, and age significantly influence how individuals perceive and impact organisational values. Embracing diversity allows for a more inclusive understanding of values, helping organisations to better align with the needs and perspectives of their various stakeholder groups, and fostering a more equitable and productive work environment. Penultimately, organisational change. Aligning individual and organisational values is essential for successful and rapid organisational change. When values are aligned, employees are more likely to embrace change, remain motivated, and adapt quickly, ensuring that transformation efforts are not only effective, but also sustainable in the long run. And finally, long-term success. Values-based management practices are key to ensuring long-term organisational success. Companies that incorporate their core values into every aspect of their operations, from decision-making and leadership to daily interactions, create a resilient and adaptive organisation capable of thriving in an ever-evolving business environment. These values serve as a guiding force that keeps the organisation grounded and focused on its mission in the long run. Now, that's a very top level and inadequate summary of the huge literature. I appreciate that in some respects it goes beyond governance, but when one looks at how governance has impact, one has to go beyond that. And so, to the findings. The findings have been grouped under three headings. Findings relating to the communication of values, behaviours, and the context in which organisations work. So, first, communication. Values unify integrity and foster organisational cohesion, but they are expressed in a huge variety of ways. Some of the organisations that we looked at had very long sentences which described their values. Some organisations had 4 or 5 pithy words, or short phrases. It will not surprise you to know that in those organisations with the pithy words and short phrases, there was much more remembering of the values and much more putting them into practice. As far as the visibility of values within organisations was concerned, again, there was a huge variety. There were some organisations, one of them had head office with an entire wall on their public-facing websites took great care to make sure that their values were put to the third finding around communications was about codes of conduct. I mean, values on their own are not enough, and to have effect they needed to be translated into codes of conduct which defined behaviours, and the process of doing that was almost as powerful as the actual values themselves. What we've done in the report, by the way, is we have interspersed actual quotes from the interviews to illustrate the points that were made. And one of those, under the Code of Conduct, says, we unpack the values with a series of behaviours. And another one says, it's about clarity. Next, cascading values. Some of the earlier words that I've used refer to the values needing to be known throughout the organisation, and the differences between the sort of view from the board and the view from other bits of the organisation. Well, the process of cascading values is necessary to ensure alignment across all levels. They need to be communicated consistently, and when we come to leadership, we'll look again at how that is done. In terms of the long-term impact of values, the strategy of organisations has to be underpinned by values. Values-driven is a phrase used by some organisations. They started with the main strategy, which had the values in it, for instance. And the cyclical nature of the strategy formulation process provided quite a lot of opportunities for people to reevaluate the extent to which the values were having an effect. When it came to the annual report, our researcher found that by and large organisations did. The reports were quite clear about the values. There was a feeling that that helped to build trust, and also the process of putting the annual report together was an opportunity to reflect on the extent to which values were being put into practice. The second heading for reporting on values was behaviours. Alright? And in terms of governance, building integrity and transparency from within. A quote, crucially, what has helped with good governance is openness and transparency. That has a strong tie across to good governance. Values are integral to good governance from our perspective. We don't see governance as a bolt-on. It's about how we have a governance process that aligns with our values. And this next quote I really like, and I suspect a number of you will feel as well. Governance and values are absolutely inextricably linked. If you don't live your values, which should be the core purpose of your business, expect to be over-governed. So very, very strong ties there between values and governance. Now I mentioned that this work goes slightly beyond governance, but necessarily so. And the next heading refers to human resources. the values. And think back to the cascading point. And the ways in which this was done were quite interesting. One firm said, half of the appraisal is about how you worked to the values. That, I would suggest, is quite a strong position. Staff retention benefits, living the values, values-based recognition schemes, employee of the month, for instance, and peer-to-peer recognition. On board meetings, embedding the values in decision making. Now, here, the range of practice is quite interesting, and it's very wide. Some organisations explicitly incorporated values into their board discussions, ensuring that they were a regular and integral part of decision making. Values were often explicitly mentioned in board papers with specific sections or agenda items dedicated to discussing values, such as diversity, equity, and value for money, and so on. Some organisations, though, shared with Maria that actually they thought it was much more implicit. And we'll come back to that point at the very end of this part of our meeting. So, mixed practice, but an awareness of values. Challenging failure. Now, I'm not sure I can tell the whole story, but there was one situation which was shared with Maria. All of the organisations involved, apart from two brave organisations that agreed to join us tonight, are not named anywhere in this report, so that they could be more open. And there was one situation where a governor, a director, was repeatedly challenged about his failure to embody the organisation's values. Now you can imagine that was a very difficult conversation to have. And what was actually fed to us was that it was through the discussion of values and the misalignment of values that that situation was resolved and the gentleman concerned resigned. So the values-based focus of what we do. I mentioned before leadership, inspiring values-driven change from the top, tone from the top, affecting the culture, to put real purpose behind leadership. And that came through very strongly. Change management, another important topic to drive what we have to do. An appreciation of values as being fundamental, as a need for change management, was found to be very important. And then the final group of findings relate to the context. Here, what we found is that the history of an organisation, even if that is a very long history, has a fundamental and profound effect. One quote: "We have a legacy policy that is 100 years old. I can't change that overnight." Another area where we had some very positive feedback about research was risk management. Now, those firms in the financial services sector very hot on risk management, as you might expect. Some of the organisations in other sectors not so hot. forming of the eyes of the two people she was talking with, and they went away, and their risk management is now done differently. So, a values-based risk management approach. The COVID legacy, which in part is at the start of this research, as it happens, has not turned out to be as significant as we anticipated that it would be. I mean, firms obviously need to do a number of things to keep the values fresh and current and people working to them. And one quote here, if you're sat at home and fixated on your own area, you do create silos more quickly. So that, I think, is something to take account of. And then just two more. This next one refers to generational differences. And what was coming through some of the interviews was a quite significant difference between the ways Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z related to the company, the values, and so on. And that bit of research is continuing. Maria has set up a couple of actual learning sets with firms, and they are together exploring that and what will happen. And then lastly, we found that this research raised awareness quite considerably with those being interviewed. And in many cases, people went away and looked again at what they were doing to evaluate it. And it's with that in mind that there is an unscheduled output from this research. And that is that Maria has prepared the material that she used in interviews in a form which is now available online. So anybody from any organisation can go into it and use this methodology that we have developed to look at their own values and to be a stimulus to whether there is any way in which they might strengthen their adherence to their values, review their values, and so on. But that is quite enough from me, bearing even in mind that I'm speaking with another three people in this. I think it's now important that we hear from two of the company secretaries who were brave enough to take part in the research. Let me put that into context. And I'm sure my colleagues won't mind me saying this, but there was a stage about 4 months into this when we were extremely worried. We've done a lot of work with Leeds, and we had just one organisation that was prepared to talk to us. We ended up with 14, which is perfect. Let us now hear from two of those organisations. You have their handouts on your seat, and first is Christina Ingate, former Company Secretary and Director for Governance of London Local Government Pension Scheme, CIP.
Good evening to ladies and gentlemen, members of the delivery company or here as guests. I am the very recently retired Company Secretary of London CIP. It's the investment pool for the London-based local government pension schemes, LGPS for short. It's the simplest way to explain it, I think. The LGPS is one of the largest open DB pension schemes in the world. a total value of 354 billion. And London CIB is one of 8 boards and on a trajectory to manage over 50 billion in assets. I can see someone from one of the other boards here, and I stand in slight trepidation of contradiction, but it will make for an interesting debate later on, particularly on governance. The presentation is very much a personal reflection to try and bring the Leeds Beckett research to life through the experience of just one case study organisation. And whilst I'm not using slides as such, I thought just having a few visuals would help you. And they're the ones with the purple branding, just in case you're wondering. And the first one, just at the bottom of the page, presents both purpose and value statements and a reminder of which the London local authorities are. All the logos there, and you can spot the City of London on the left. First up, in the bottom. Davis just reminded me that it was hard to persuade people to take part in the research to begin with, and I don't think that was a lack of interest as such. I mean, from a personal perspective, the topic is really close to my heart. I've worked across several sectors and hold the view that if you can get the North Star of culture and values right and set a clear direction, then you can provide the context for the organisation to deliver what it is set up to do. And that is really one of the prime tasks of the board. There's a great quote in the report about values being the silent architects of good decision making. And I read that research and thought, forward to reading this. And then there was the second call for people to take part, and I thought, oh, okay, put up our hands. And actually, it had come at a great time for London CIB because it was an opportunity to hold up the mirror to the work we had in hand under a new CEO to undertake a strategic review about what we were about, but also to look at our purpose and value statements. And it was easier to persuade a new CEO, I think, to hold up that mirror than it might have been somebody who was there for a while. And we were looking for a purpose statement that could inspire hearts and minds and to reduce our values words from 7 to a small number, ideally on the fingers of one hand, because that's more than the point that David was making before. As you all know, from a governance perspective, the board owned the organisation's high-level strategy, culture, risk appetite, governance. And for us, and I should think for many of you, the distinction between purpose and values is really paper thin. Together, those two sets of phrases define the culture that you can't really talk about values without referring to purpose and vice versa. So I hope you'll forgive me if I do that. And a key consideration for us in holding up the mirror was to look at whether the changes we were making were taking us in the direction that we hoped for. And so we made a point of including in the research the people that were involved in the corporate planning process. And for that, for us, that was primarily the CEO, the CFO, myself, and then we wanted to get somebody who was more junior in the organisation and reflected on the diversity of the team. And so we persuaded one of the junior members of the governance team to be an interviewee to provide that broader insight. And I was hoping she'd be here this evening so I could thank her and embarrass her in front of you all, but she's not able to be here. But Marie is close to the end of completing her professional exams, and the research has benefited from the perspective of Generation Z, and so have I. And I want to thank all the Generation Z in the profession because I knew we would benefit from it. So that's my reflection on the experience of taking part in the research. The second reflection is more focused in on the topic of the research, which is governance, purpose and values. For us as an organisation, London CIB, we expanded by 32 partner funds who are both the clients and the shareholders. So it's more like a private equity firm than a PLC, and it's got a very high engagement business model. On the other hand, much of the reporting and governance is akin to a public firm because it's got a wide impact and importance to a broad range of stakeholders, including the London taxpayer, local government pension schemes. I think it's probably helpful to think weights in terms of the governance and the reporting. And London CIB is also FCA regulated and has to think about the specific requirements of LGPS pension regulations, and they're a matter of public government policy. So there's quite a lot in terms of what's your governance like. But I don't think that's very different from any other organisation, actually. To the point David was making, you need to think about what's your governance values need to look like, both in terms of the external and internal context. It does mean, for the London CRB context, that the shareholders of the partner funds are involved in agreeing the very high-level strategy and financial plan annually. And I've tried to show how that works in a kind of virtuous circle. In the third slide, you've got the top of the third page, just as a kind of visual overview. Just to reflect on the purpose and values in more detail, and I'll pick them. We put the fourth slide on the bottom of the page, and got the route of the River Thames and Shard picture. The full purpose statement is one of those ones that was rather long, because it aims to reflect the commitment to responsible investment and collaboration, working together to deliver sustainable prosperity in the communities that can console. And that phrase, sustainable prosperity, has in mind quality of retirement living for those delivering local services and key end stakeholders, the London CRB as a firm, people who've worked in local government services in London, education, social services, housing, the basics, clean streets, taking away rubbish. And broader stakeholders include London taxpayers, the wider economy, society, the world we live in. So the stewards of those funds, values such as integrity and responsibility have a wider resonance. And the values need to be ones that speak both to the staff team, they also need to speak to those partner funds. And collaboration is key in delivering maximum value to the London local government pension scheme, and also in developing solutions that go beyond managing funds, but helping those partner funds deliver in a value-added way. So providing TCFD climate reporting, which is not the simplest thing in the world to do, quite intensive. It's actually been a really good example of working with partner funds to identify something that they want. For the staff team, making links to help them ensure what and how align with expectations and the full play of the public policy change is essential. Pensions are constantly in the press, local governments in the press a lot, the government's interest in seeing a double benefit out of public sector pensions has been in the press a lot, and creating a pride in being purpose-driven in certain matters. So the purpose and value statements are important to achieving that. And when it comes to those funds, responsible investment and the potential for local impact, a local dividend, if you like, have been key areas of interest. London CRB offers 28 funds, split 20 public markets, so equities, and so forth, and a private market. And 53% of those private market funds are UK invested. So they cover infrastructure, housing, funds that contribute to net zero targets. And I haven't got time to go into that now. Other ground to cover, but just having included some more information on that, just to give you a bit more colour in terms of what the staff team are delivering, expected to deliver, to provide that double bottom line ability to invest in London, in housing, in the infrastructure more broadly, in addition to delivering what we all expect in terms of good return for our pensions, to have that prosperity in retirement. Just looking back again at the values, again in slide 4, London, as with most capital cities, is amazingly diverse in every way. Politically, terms of extremes of wealth, ethnic heritage, more. But at the end of the day, there's a huge pride in being London, which helps bring people together to find solutions. So having diversity as a value matters hugely to park funds, as well as the team, which in itself is very diverse. We debate sometimes whether inclusion would be a better word than diversity, and sometimes it is. But at the end of the day, you have to write on the word to include in your value statements. David said something about the importance of HR, and I wanted to comment on that because ownership was actually really critical as an issue in making values live. We were really clear that the board and exec ownership was critical, and that the co-sec and the governance team, the key role, was trusted advisors and strategic enablers. We were on the journey to make sure the performance review process evaluates behaviours alongside the delivery of objectives aligned to the strategy. And HR are key to making sure that's actually done successfully, and it's a difficult task. And I don't think anyone in London's CRB would want to claim that they've actually got to where they want to be. It's not an easy one. Interestingly, the risk chair been emphatic that they needed to know that there were individuals whose behaviours could potentially create risk, including by undermining the culture. And that's very salutary when it comes to performance appraisals, and sends out a very salutary message to individuals as well. Finally, I might be pleased to know some comments on next steps, and the research has some suggested next steps, and these are the ones that are particularly strong to me. There should be only 3 of them, but I've got 6, so I thought each of them is 2. So the first 2 the first step, make sure the governments of the organisation continually to support the current internal and external changes in the business environment. And then consider, as part of that, purpose and values together, because both are key to culture. And then secondly, look at the integration of enterprise risk and values as part of the whole conversation. And then perhaps make some judicious use of the values research as part of the broader evaluation. But if you do, make it light touch. My experience is that the best evaluations are the ones where the questionnaire and the report is short, and the conversation by the board is long, thick, and deep. And then thirdly, and again this is a tough, consider the role of the company secretary in enabling the strategic foresight, visualising the future, protecting values, home purpose, and also navigating the gaps, the things that might be missed need to be held together, and value differences, and be inquisitive about different perspectives. I want to conclude with some words from my successor, because for me, her view about whether the linkages are evident on the ground is a good trace, whether it's just speaking fine words to somebody who's retiring and that knows the organisation or not. And anyway, I asked the marketing department as well, because there was a financial disclaimer for the financial services organisation. So I told Liz what I planned to say and asked her to challenge anything that isn't presently. Government's people very tough on this country. And I asked her to offer a quote. And she said the deciding factor for me joining London CIB is the opportunity to work in an organisation that's purpose-led and holds true to its values. Very moving. Now, I think it would be wrong to be complacent. It's a fine quote. Values are a way of life, and they're always in work in progress. None achieved or in government professionals who would have it any other way. But I was heartened by the words, as they suggest that progress is being made in a virtuous circle is in place. Values are key to good decision making and good governance, and stakeholders will always tell you they perceive it's misaligned. Thank you for your attention.
Our second company secretary is Claire Barrett. Claire is company secretary of Quilter. Quilter was formerly known as the Old Mutual Wealth Management Limited, a British multinational wealth management company. And you're most welcome.
Well, maybe to let without calling down the trick hazard and then back on serious, so I think we're going to be off to a good start. So good evening everyone, it's my absolute pleasure to be with you in this just absolutely truly magnificent setting. I'm completely overawed by the beauty of the building and thank you for your attention. My name is Claire Barrett and as Dave said, I'm the Group Company Secretary at Quilter. Unless you follow the rugby, we're probably the largest wealth manager you've never heard of. Thank you, David and Christina, and I think I'm allowed to admit to call you Master, for inviting me and Quilter to this fun event and to participate in the research and the launch event. And what an interesting discussion we're already beginning to have. My focus is to share our culture and values journey and how that resonates with many of the points the research focused on and have been drawn out today already. So I'd like to talk to you about 5 things. And if you want to follow along, there are some slides on those with the green ones, the very green ones. I'm going to give you some context around Quilter and why our board oversaw a culture and values refresh. Then I want to share a short case study on our values change programme, which we kicked off in 2023, was implemented in 2024, and is going to continue to embed in 2025 and beyond. And I'd like to conclude by reflecting on how our experience at Quilter resonates with the research findings outlined to you today, and why we believe that having the right values are so important for businesses today. So why and how did Quilter switch from the values that you can see on slide 3 to the new purpose and values set out on slide 4? Slide 4 summarises where we are today. We have a refreshed purpose underpinned by 4 values. Do the right thing, embrace challenge, always curious and strong together. And importantly, our purpose and values are underpinned by behaviours which we set out: ambition, accountability and learning. These behaviours are expected of our colleagues in all that they do every day. And as you can see, the words in slides 3 and 4 are not that different. And for Quilter, this was evolution, not revolution. So why did the board spend so much time, and management and colleagues too, on this change? And why was it fundamentally important to support our purpose? To answer that question, I'm going to have to explain briefly, where Quilter has come from, and more importantly, where our board wants us to get to. So Quilter is the second largest wealth manager. We employ around 3,500 people in London, Southampton, and a few other large cities. We were 1/3 of the business spun out of Mutual Wealth, as David mentioned, back in 2018, and were dual regulated and listed on the London and the Johannesburg stock exchanges. Critically, we had a change of chair, and latterly, the second half In 2023, the board asked management to consider the firm's culture to support the ambitious agenda the board has brought up. First, let me share with you our board timeline. For those following along, we're now on slide 8. In our case, from the first board discussion in May 2023, it took over a year for the new purpose and values to be formally launched to all colleagues at a conference in July 2024. Our chair and board were instrumental in setting a clear tone from the top about the importance of this foundational work. So broadly, over a year of design, both top-down in strategic direction and then bottom-up, sponsored by our CEO and managed by our HR team. They led a fully inclusive conversation with colleagues to ensure appropriate buy-in and engagement within a clear structure. And the journey is over. The activity taken to support managers and colleagues continues, with the board continuing to be kept informed on progress of embedding. No culture change is going to happen overnight, and I will now share with you some of the key steps and how that transformation programme was achieved. Whether it's evolution or revolution, we believe to be successful, you need to take your people with you. So let me quickly take you through some of the process we're going to put the quilter in your slides, now turning to slide 9. As I said earlier, we believe that culture, purpose and values are strategic enablers. By this I mean that our business was at a pivot point, and we wanted to equip leaders, managers and colleagues with the tools to deliver our ambition and our potential. Our starting point was top-down, focused on the culture anchors. What behaviours did we need to support our ambitions? Following a conversation around the board table, board members then provided input one-to-one with HR, supported by a diagnostic tool on the anchor behaviours to pinpoint how culture could best support our customers and stakeholders and deliver long-term shareholder value. This exercise was repeated with our executive team to check and challenge the outcomes, with the results overlaid to determine the final outcome agreed by the board. With the purpose and culture anchor set, we recognised that we had to engage colleagues so that they owned and were empowered to deliver the value change day to day. As a financial services organisation with a clear priority around the customer, we also consulted over 300 customers to understand from their perspective what they wanted and needed from us. On slide 10, I'll set out the process HR facilitated to make the changes we believe was necessary. This slide doesn't include board engagement, but is focused on the efforts we made to engage our colleagues and customers. Our colleague participation was gathered in person and online through virtual workshops and physical drop-in spaces. Part of the communication programme utilised the stories and behaviours which we believe was crucial for its success. The process was very inclusive, and on slide 11 you will see some of the key engagement statistics. We appointed 50 culture champions, we held 14 colleague workshops, we gathered 800 data points with some help from AI, and we held 40 culture Kickstarter workshop for teams. Our values were launched at an all-colleague conference in July, with sponsorship from our chair, who introduced the event, and an introduction from our CEO. A montage of our employee voices were played as people discussed what the values meant for them. The event was attended by over 2,000 people, watching online and more than 300 in person. We did the whole physical thing too. There were posters on walls, lanyards, notebooks, branded, all the rest of it. You name it, they did it. Then from the launch, we gathered feedback on what went well to check how the new values were landing. Our colleagues told us in surveys and feedback loops that they felt positive, motivated, and empowered to be part of the change. They appreciated the sense of unity and felt informed about the company's direction. Overall, the new values were well received and they felt inspired and excited about their future. If you turn to slide 13, you can see that following the launch there was a series of training and education for leaders and managers with topics around impactful conversations, leading with purpose, setting ambitious goals. Teams were encouraged to attend culture Kickstarter workshops, quite tricky to say that, to discuss what was meant in their team, what was new. All our governance processes were refreshed to reflect the purpose and values. This included changing our performance review process to recognise the how along with the what. And our new culture anchors are included in our meeting papers to remind our people and our board of the behaviours that we expect. So let's bring this back to where I started. On slide 14, I've shared an insight on how our board know that this activity has been a success. In addition to the human insights they get day to day, interacting with colleagues and hearing directly from them in the board, the board now routinely receives a culture dashboard. This dashboard tracks and feeds back from colleagues around key behaviours and engagement metrics. I appreciate it's small in the facts, but you all know that it also includes an external lens to keep this anchored to our company performance and, importantly, to our purpose. So back to the research. How did filter and measure the research? On slide 16, I set out some of the key engagement points. For us, the research project was timely, and we're grateful to the little company Leeds Beckett University for leading us in the programme. I say the interaction is timely because we received the introduction as we were coming to the end of our culture and personal values implementation, so the topic was really front of mind. Most of you probably delved into the wide-ranging questions that were asked, and clearly there are bigger impacts of the research in continuing a conversation around values. Why did we cut narrowly the filter? The research prompted further welcome conversations about the value of the change we've gone through and how it supported our drive for strategic change. My background is in financial services, and I was at Barclays at the time of the results review, which I'm sure many of you will recall was a report commissioned on the bank's culture following the events around LIBOR. As a colleague, I clearly remember the training I attended and having to lead my team to think about what new large words, which were everywhere, stating our new values, what they meant for us, and how we translate them into behaviours and everyday actions. As Dr. Maria arrived first, she gave me pause for thought, but also, dare I say it, a sense of job well done. We did get tone from the top, senior buy-in, thoughtful inclusive college engagement that's beyond physical signage, data points to assess progress, careful consideration of the language we use to balance risk and innovation. Doing the right thing is something we all strive for. The process of being asked the questions and reflecting on our experience was both, dare I say, cathartic and challenging. The research really did endorse and validate the focus our board had given to this change programme and for us to deliver with purpose, and how it is a catalyst of business growth and development. In conclusion, our approach to refreshing our core values was both comprehensive and inclusive, with a clear tone set from the top by the board. We cultivated a sense of ownership, enthusiasm and pride amongst our employees, a key ingredient to embed those values deeply within Quilter's DNA. This is backed up with new performance management and measurement, checking on both the what and the how. The investment made by the Russian company, backed up with a robust research programme run by Leeds Beckett, is timely for all companies in the face of recent loss of trust from big business. And if you haven't already tried the diagnostic, it's really worthwhile reading the questions posed and thinking about how the organisation you run or work for would stack up. Whilst I expect you wanted to leave you with an extract from the Corporate Governance Code, sorry Peter, I'm actually going to turn to Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Your belief becomes your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny." And with that, I'm going to come back to David.
And I'll conclude with the invitation. As the clerk was telling me just before we started today, this research has a lot further to go. We've made a useful first step, and we've had some very encouraging feedback to that. So my response or my invitation to you is to become engaged with us. And that may look different for different organisations and so on. But I have plenty of cards in my pocket, and you know where the company is, and we very much value the input from the Institute and from others into this research. So we plan to continue, and we would like to do it with you, and let that engagement start now with an opportunity for you to ask any questions or issue any challenges that you think may be helpful. A roving microphone will come among you. The first question, please.
Thank you. Question for you, David. Integrity and diversity lead to long-term improved performance. I mean, it's not really a very surprising finding, but these principles are under attack, aren't they? Short-term incentives appear to be the order of the day in lots of organisations. There's a sort of anti-woke backlash in some quarters. And so my question is what the company, and it may also be a question for Peter, what the company in the Institute are doing to promote integrity, diversity, responsibility in organisations, just publicly, to the outside world. We know we have the toolkit, but how are you going to get 140 rather than 14 companies to take it up?
It's a very appropriate challenge to us, and in various things that the company does. The focus is on integrity and getting people to explore what that means and share what that means. The Institute has its annual conference, and that topic arises there. We have not just a court of assistants, we also have an education committee, and the chair is sitting here, and maybe that is an item which we need to put on our agenda. I can't give you a complete answer to it, only to acknowledge that it's a hugely important question, and we should be doing more. We do a number of things with schools, and we're therefore starting with people at a very young age. How does that integrity play through in school councils, for instance? So as part of our education, we are picking that up. Let me just be slightly cheeky and return the question and invite you to share any ways in which you think the company might take this further, because we are waiting. Any other?
Well, there are one or two ideas that come to mind immediately there, which I haven't heard of on the stage program, but that's always an interesting forum. I don't read the governance magazine anymore. No, it's not there. But I'm sure there will be articles on it in there. And we do have a great pool of knowledge with findings of the research. The company could even afford, I think, to publicise something as important as this. Yes, I think company secretaries are a good set of people to approach and follow up with. And that's just thinking off the top of my head, you know, without spending some time looking at other ways of promoting.
Yeah. Let's continue. I mean, I'm sure probably some colleagues who are long-standing know this, but when I had my was asked, I wanted before what I call state occasions for dinners and lunches to have a serious input about the meaning of integrity in their particular professions. We had a very senior clergyman, a former cabinet secretary, a very senior Oxford person, and a senior member of the Royal Air Force. They all found it extremely difficult to do. They told some interesting stories, but they all admitted they found it to be an extremely difficult task. It's a task we need to work on.
Yes. It appears though that nobody is speaking up for integrity at the moment, doesn't it?
I don't disagree with you. And we'll take volunteers for the Today programme.
I'm absolutely not volunteering for the
Oh,
day
no,
but just on the integrity thing, I can't recall being COSEC in a context where integrity hasn't been an important word as part of, you know, what's our North Star or conversation. And I think the interesting thing about any board evaluation is whether one can get the integrity conversation going there, because when I perform questions for any internal board evaluation, something along the lines of integrity, even if you don't use that word, is usually been part of the questionnaire. So for me, the obvious place to get the boardroom conversation about recompetent integrity is one of the values by which we operate as a board, is as part of that board evaluation. And similarly, I think the diversity data and inclusion ought to be working its way into the thing, which is, you know, what was partly going through my mind when I was saying, look at this research, think about whether the themes and the conversation works its way into your board evaluations. So that helps, but I hope
It does. Thank you very much. We have a question in the front row. The very front row. Sorry, had you put your hand up as well?
I'm very interested in the generational differences. I wondered whether, is it that the values are interpreted so differently generationally, or is it that the organisations are not evolving their values and bringing the organisational side at pace?
Okay.
I mean, one I didn't really say, but one of the reasons we looked at our values and the words we used was actually to make them more meaningful for the current generation of employees, because we had very fine words, you know, they were absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with them. We didn't actually move very far from them, but we chose more inclusive language that people could understand and get behind. Because ultimately, it's only successful if they get behind the words that you pick. So I think you've got a really important point that you need to be mindful of who you're trying to and who are your ambassadors day to day with your customers or your regulators or your firms or whatever it is.
The only thing that I can add to that is I think there were two aspects that are coming out of the action that you says. One is about the expectations and attitudes of the younger generations. This shift from sort of loyalty to the organisation to loyalty to themselves. They're really in charge, not the organisation. is company leaders were not engaging with young people in a way that they recognised. They were engaging with the mindset, you owe us your living sort of thing. And that was harsh with young people. But that work is continuing. So who knows, next time we gather, maybe Leeds will have more to share on that.
We very intentionally involved one of the young and governance team in as an interviewing research, and that was very helpful, and I'm grateful to Marie for being brave and speaking clearly as she always does. What was also helpful was that was then also representative of what we call employee voice, which is our kind of employee sounding board. And as David said, I think expectations of the workplace are different, generational. But what we found important in the organisation is that the CEO regularly goes to that employee voice forum, and his direct conversation with those representatives who are there is really, really important. So they hear from the horses now, I can call the CEOs, the reasons why and why not things are being done a different way. And that direct challenge has proved very helpful as a piece of dialogue. So there is something about how you offer explanations within organisations, and equally the CEO hearing it direct and making and creating opportunities to hear things direct that matters. I have to say to the CEO is significantly, not a generation younger than me, but there is that thing too about how old the senior managers are in an organisation, and that begins to change and shape it as well. And I think that's a rather interesting dynamic.
Right, 4 rows back.
I think we've got quite used over the years to looking for corporate and other values somewhere in the spectrum of the values of liberal democracy as a whole. And it does seem to me that what's going on in the States at the moment in particular is really a huge challenge to that in all sorts of ways. The past master referred to loyalty to one's individuality rather than to the organisation. And that's a part of it, but I think there's a whole spectrum of things where current values, or what we've grown used to thinking of as current values, are changing and are under attack. And I wonder if anyone's got any thoughts about how we can actually best manage the changes that are occurring.
Well, again, we have had some absolutely brilliant questions, right? And I work in higher education. I'm Secretary General of the local body, and I have to share with you what's happening in the States at the moment is an absolute nightmare at the moment. And I've been called to a meeting next week to work out how we might even start to try and deal with it. I think going back to the first question, that word integrity is hugely important in where we start from and how we make sure that comes through. But I may be slightly wiser in next week, but I struggle at the moment to say anything valuable. Can I, just before the master says a few words, just say 4 lines of thanks. The first is to the court of the River Company for having faith, particularly at times when it looked as if we were facing difficulties with this church, and for funding it and for sticking us to this stage. And can I thank my colleagues on the steering committee for doing an outstanding and very two colleague speakers this evening for absolutely outstanding and very well judged contributions. And finally, can I thank Keith and Karen and colleagues in the office, because there's been a huge amount of work behind the scenes, and I'm obviously grateful to them.
And I'll just thank Past Master David Locke and everyone here. Our motto is service with integrity, and I like to thank all the members that I meet in my day-to-day life, all the company secretaries, chartered secretaries, administrators, and members of our profession of governance do serve with integrity. I haven't met many who, well, I don't think I've ever really met any that I thought they had no integrity. So I'm pleased to feel that we do have integrity, and let's share that amongst ourselves, and let's challenge it when we're faced with issues where we do have to challenge it, and we can get support for each other when we do that by just our fellowship and what we believe in. So with that, thank you all again. Thank you so much for a really interesting session. We're going to have some tea and coffee, and then we're going to come back for the highlight of the evening, the actual Sylvia Tubb Memorial Lecture. So do stay with us.